Okay, guys, today we're going to be looking at demand, and we are going to be talking about a couple of things with dealing with demand and what demand is and the law of demand. But we're also going to be talking about a couple of other things called the substitution effect, the income effect. We're going to be looking at factors that that can change demand. And then we're going to talk about the elasticity of demand as well as total revenue. So those are going to be our main focal points of this lesson as we move forward. So with that being said, let's dive into talking about demand. So when we use the term demand, we're saying it is the desire to own something and the ability to pay for it. That is the definition for demand. When we talk about law of demand, this is our standard definition. The law of demand states that the lower a good's price, the more the consumers will buy, and the higher a good's price, the less consumers will buy. That is the straightforward definition for the law of demand. Examples of this: you would demand less pizza if pizza goes from $2 a slice to $4 a slice. And then vice versa. You would demand more pizza if it drops from $4 a slice to $2 a slice. So those are examples of the law of demand. We also have, just like we did with supply, we also have demand schedules and demand curves. People who study economics use two tools to illustrate how price affects the quantity demanded. And those two tools are demand schedules and demand curves. The demand schedule is a table or a chart that shows how much of a good consumers will buy at different prices. A demand curve will plot the data from the demand schedule on a graph. And let's look at what both of those look like. On the left, we have a demand schedule, and this is showing you the price of a small soda. On the right, we have how much would be demanded based on that particular price. So if soda starts off at 25 cents, then the demand for it would be 890 sodas. But as the price of the soda goes up, you will notice at $2.75, then that meant that the demand is going to go down. So that's showing you that on a demand schedule. You could take that demand schedule and you could make a demand curve based on the data that is on this demand schedule. Over to your right, we have a demand curve for gasoline and probably had a demand schedule for it as well, but they have plotted the points on a graph showing you what the demand schedule was showing for gasoline. And we're going to talk about a shift that can occur on the demand curve. And if the demand curve shifts to the right, then that means that demand has increased. If the demand curve were to shift to the left, then that means you would have a demand decrease. We also have a couple of other ways that the law of demand will produce two patterns of behavior. The first pattern is the substitution effect, and we're going to talk about that. And the second pattern is known as the income effect. The substitution effect says that as the price of one good rises, people are likely to choose a less expensive substitute good. So when the price goes up, they're going to look for alternatives. An example: when the price of pizza goes up, people will choose a less expensive alternative or substitute. So instead of going to maybe a pizza specialty restaurant that charges a large price for it, you may go to Domino's or Little Caesars to buy the pizza. That would be an alternative or substitute versus that pizza. In the same way, if the price of pizza were to drop, people might substitute pizza for other more expensive items on the menu. So they may buy something extra. They may buy uh, fettuccine, or they may buy chicken Alfredo or something along those lines along with the pizza. So again, they could choose to buy more expensive things on the menu other than just pizza. We also have something known as the income effect. Sometimes a good may go up in price and simply cause people to just buy less of that particular good without purchasing other goods. So they'll just buy less of that rather than going out and buying other things. That behavior is known as the income effect. And again, if we were to use pizza as an example, when the price of pizza went up, people can no longer afford to buy the same combination of goods. So they would naturally cut back on their purchases and buy less. Now, sometimes we have changes in demand, and there are certain factors that go into changes in demand. Price is not the only factor that affects demand. There are several other factors that can cause demand to shift. If the demand curve shifts at every price level, then you have a change in demand. And again, this is showing you the shift in the demand curve. And again, like I said earlier, when the demand curve shifts to the right, that is an increase in demand. When the demand curve shifts to the left, that is a decrease in the demand curve. Remember that demand curves always go downward. So let's look at some of the change in demand factors. The first one would be changes in income. How much money people make will affect their demand for a good or service. And we would use this in looking at two types of goods that usually are associated with this. Normal goods, and with normal goods, the demand for most items increases when people's income increases. So they're going to buy more of those things. And usually those are things like things at the grocery store. That would be an example. But also, an increase in income actually causes the demand to decrease with inferior goods. So let's look at that. So inferior goods are goods that are things like things you might purchase from Dollar General that are sort of off-brand, or you might go to McDonald's rather than going to a more expensive hamburger place, maybe Chick-fil-A or something like that. But usually when the economy is bad, people will buy things from like Dollar General and McDonald's because those things are less expensive and they can afford them. These would be examples of inferior goods, or like a knockoff cola. Instead of buying Coca-Cola, you might buy, Czech Cola or something else, So that would be an example of an inferior good. We also have consumer expectations. Consumer expectations is what you expect the price to do in the future affects the demand for it. Sometimes you have a positive relationship, which means if you expect the price to rise, you will demand more now, and vice versa if you think the price will go down. An example of this was if a hurricane were going to hit in 3 days, naturally the demand for water and batteries and toilet paper and all those other things would naturally go up. Also, changes in demographics would help change demand. Statistical characteristics of a population, such as age, gender, and race, all play factors in a change in demand. For instance, if you have an older population like we've been talking about, then you might have more demand for healthcare, or more demand for wheelchairs or walking canes. or something along those lines because the population is older. Also, a change in population size could definitely impact demand. More people usually means more demand. Less people would mean less demand. Changes in consumer taste. There are social trends that cause people to want to buy things, such as iPhones and iPads and Baby Yoda and Yetis and Jordan basketball shoes. All of those are things that are in high demand, and they are social trends that are changes in consumers' taste. Advertising and marketing can also trigger a shift in demand. Super Bowl commercials, for instance, cost over $5 million. They put all that advertising out there to try to get people to purchase these items or use a service or whatever it may be. And the Super Bowl commercials are $5 million for a 30-second commercial. So again, you got to spend money to make money. Change in demand, too, for one good can also cause the demand for a related good as well. Two types of related goods are complementary goods and substitute goods. Complementary goods are goods that sort of go together. So if the demand for cereal were to go up, then that would mean the demand for milk would go up as well. These are goods that are bought and used together. An example that I've listed on here, the demand for cars go up, so will the demand for gasoline. So you need gas to make cars go naturally. So you would buy more gas because there'd be more cars. And then we've also already talked about substitute goods. But again, these are goods that are used in the place of a particular item. So those the demand for those things would go up as well. For instance, if the demand for gas goes down because prices are too high, then the demand for solar energy could possibly go up, or the demand for electricity or batteries. If you were driving an electric car, it would naturally go up if gas prices became too high. So those are substitute goods. Now, with demand, we also have elasticity, which we discussed when we talked about supply as well. But the elasticity of demand is used to describe the way people respond to price changes. When you have a price increase, but you keep buying despite of that price increase, then the demand is considered to be inelastic. If you were to buy a lot less because of a price increase, then your demand is considered elastic. It's going to change. The fewer the substitutes usually means the demand is inelastic, like certain medicines, like insulin. People are still going to buy insulin regardless of the price. Demand is often elastic for luxury items because those things change quite frequently. A mathematical formula can also be used to measure the elasticity of demand. This formula is known as the elasticity of demand coefficient. The formula calculates the ratio of change in demand based on the change in price. If there is less than a 1-to-1 ratio, then usually that means the demand is inelastic. If there is more or greater than a 1-to-1 ratio, then that means the demand is elastic. If the coefficient is equal to 1, then we have what we call unit elastic demand. These are representations of each one of those. Elastic demand would be when you had a coefficient ratio of greater than or would be greater than 1. And again, it's showing you here the change in quantity versus the change in price. If you had a 40% decrease in the change in quantity and a 10% increase in the change in price, your number naturally would be greater than 1, and you would have elastic demand. With inelastic demand, you would have a number less than 1, and usually that's represented here. When you had a 10% decrease in the change in quantity and a 30% change in price, that would have been less than 1, and therefore you end up with inelastic demand. To get unit elastic demand, you would have to have the same percentage of change in quantity and the same percentage in the change in price in order to get a number of exactly 1. You can also have perfectly inelastic, which would be a straight vertical line, and your number would have been 0. You can also have perfectly elastic, which is a straight horizontal line, and that means that your number would be infinite. Perfectly elastic demand, it means at a certain price, demand is infinite. It's going to keep going regardless. Now, we also have, with elasticity of demand, we have to talk about total revenue. Again, elasticity is an important tool for business owners because it helps them determine how a change in price will affect their business's total revenue, how much money they're going to make. Total revenue is the amount of money the company receives by selling its goods. If a business faces elastic demand for its good or service, then raising prices will result in a sharp drop in demand. This would cause a decrease in total revenue. So they wouldn't make as much money if the good or services prices were raised or became high. Naturally, you would get a sharp drop in demand, which means that these companies would have a decrease in total revenue. When a good has an inelastic demand, a business might be able to increase their prices and sell the same quantity of its good or service. In this case, the business would enjoy an increase in total revenue because the people are still going to buy it, they're still going to demand it, and you've actually raised the price. So you would actually get more money coming in, which would be an increase in total revenue. Okay, that's going to do it for demand. If you need to go back and review these notes, you can. Make sure that you study, and I will catch you guys on the next one.